Where?
There should be, yeah, on the
Where?
bottom.
On the bottom it says chat.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Not for me. It says audio, video, more.
You have to click more, Zev.
You have to, or widen out
It
your.
should be
your,
to the left
window.
of that. It should be by, like, before raise hand, to the left of raise hand, after it says
Probably
38
your Zoom
participants.
window is quite small on your screen.
Yeah,
so
stretch
maybe
it
make
out.
your Zoom
Widen
window
it out.
bigger.
That's it.
Actually, what am I doing, Cookie? You're the super tech support.
No, I'm off today.
Full screen.
Okay.
1 minute.
We're going to start in 1 minute.
Ah, I got it. Okay, thank you. I got it.
That's good.
Okay.
One more person jumped in.
Great.
Wow.
Okay.
Ethel has her hand up. Or either that or she's saying hello. Hi, Ethel.
Wait, I don't see everybody.
I don't see anybody there.
Oh, on the, no, in the panel, I'm looking at the
Oh,
attendees.
participants.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, participants.
Attendees,
Yes.
that's right.
more
Yeah.
people are coming in.
Ethel, did you want to say something?
Anybody there?
Or are you just saying hi?
Hi, Ethel.
No? All right, I'm going to lower your hand, Ethel. Oh, I've got all these superpowers as the host of this meeting. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm just delighted to, first of all, be your host today. My name's Pete Rushefsky. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Traditional Music and Dance in New York City. We've been around for, my goodness, about 57 years now. Ethel Rame's in the house. She's one of our co-founders, along with Martin Koenig. And I also helped to organize, with some of the other folks on this call, a program called Yiddish New York every year. So that's, if you don't know about Yiddish New York, go Google Yiddish New York. It's going to be in December, and it's a really great time. You don't have to know a word of Yiddish to have a great time at Yiddish New York, but if you only speak Yiddish, you'll have a great time too. And everything in between, you'll have a great time too. Right, Christina?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Terrific. Okay. So just a couple other things. Center for Traditional Music and Dance. We have we sponsor a great program called the New York Klezmer Series that Aaron Alexander curates here in New York City. So next program is going to be February 25th. Actually, it's going to feature Aaron and Alicia Spiegels in sort of an electric klezmer program, but they do almost every week. There's a great program at the Hudson Yards Synagogue right near B&H in Madison Square Garden, and they're really great programs. So thanks everybody for being here today. I'm going to introduce, I guess what I'll do is introduce, first of all, our main speaker, our author, Zisl Slepovitch, Dimitri, some people know him as, and I'll introduce Zisl. I'll give a bit of an extended bio on Zisl, and then I'll just give a very quick bio for everybody, like a one-sentence bio of everybody else, if there's things that our panelists want to say about themselves, because we know they're all esteemed, and we could all go on very long time giving all their bios and all their exploits and contributions to Yiddish music. It would go on for a very long time. So we're not going to do that. But let me just introduce Zisl, and then I'll introduce each of the panelists very quickly. So let me get my screen open so I can just see. And I will paste longer bios in the chat for everybody, so you can read their bios while during the program. But Zisl Slepovitch is a native of Minsk, Belarus. He's resided in the United States since 2008. He's a musicologist, an ethnomusicologist. He did his doctorate at the Belarusian State Academy of Music with a primary interest in the East European Jewish music culture. He's also a multi-instrumentalist, klezmer musician, classical musician, improvised music performer on woodwinds, keyboards, and vocals. He's a composer, a conductor, a musician, a Yiddish educator. He's the founding member of critically acclaimed bands such as Litvakis, the Zisl Slepovitch Trio, and the Zisl Slepovitch Ensemble. You might have seen him in numerous productions with the Folksbina And he's also now musician in residence at the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust testimonies at Yale University, where he's been doing some amazing multimedia presentations of Holocaust survivor testimonies. I won't name all his other exploits, but he's also the father of Dinala, and Dina is going to be the future of Yiddish music. So you should check out Zisl and Dina all performing wherever they're performing. So Zisl's going to be our main speaker. I'll just run through our other panelists. After Zisl speaks, we're going to have a little give and take with the panelists. We have Christina Crowder, who's the executive director of the Klezmer Institute and an absolutely awesome accordion player and pedagogue who teaches and performs all over the place these days. We have Walter Zev Feldman, who I think many of you know is one of the progenitors. I don't even know if that's a word, but I always introduce Zev as a progenitor of the klezmer revival from back in the mid-1970s when he worked with Andy Statman, as well as the Balkan Art Center, which later became Center for Traditional Music and Dance, to do a series of concerts with Dave Terrace and a recording of Dave Terrace that was very influential in kicking off the klezmer revival. Zeb's done since then amazing work as a scholar of both klezmer and Ottoman music, and he's also the academic director of the Klezmer Institute. Josh Horowitz. I mean, we're just going through a pantheon of my idols today on this webinar. I'm so excited. Josh Horowitz, many of us know, has been the longtime leader of the Budowitz Ensemble, and along with Cookie Segelstein and Joel Rubin, the Voretsky Pass is also Stuart Brotman. And they've been doing amazing work. I mean, Josh is one of sort of the preeminent musicians slash researchers, authors, pedagogues in our Yiddish music scene, and we're delighted to have him. And I will just say that Voretsky Pass recently released an incredible album of Sofia Magid's music that you should all check out. Now, maybe a little bit less known to us North Americans here on our panel is Mikhail Lukin, but that will change. Mikhail is an absolute rising star in Yiddish music research and scholarship. He's been really focused on the Yiddish folk song, which he did his dissertation on, and he recently finished up a residency at University of Pennsylvania. So he's based in Jerusalem, but I think more and more we're going to certainly enlist Mikhail on different programs because he's an absolutely incredible research and font of Yiddish music scholarship. Joel Rubin is another dear friend, mentor, and idol of mine. He's he retired from the University of Virginia, where he was a professor and associate professor and the director of music performance. He's a founder of Brave Old World. He's got the Joel Rubin Jewish Music Ensemble, which did a couple of incredible albums of Moshe Baragovsky's music, and he's put out innumerable compilations on labels like Vergo of important historical recordings, and written some very important writings, including a book on klezmer music, and also a more recent one on klezmer clarinetists of New York klezmer clarinetists of the 20th century. And finally, our final panelist, last but not least, is Cookie Segelstein, who works with Josh on Voretsky Pass, but is also an amazing resource for Yiddish fiddle styles, and she comes from a Carpathian Jewish background, and she's really kind of brought sort of an amazing Carpathian sound into her playing, and that's been very inspirational. And a lot of younger musicians have kind of adopted these sort of proto-Cookie Carpathian fiddle sounds. And so Cookie's always been a very insightful performer, and a lot of her music is absolutely contemporary sounding, but so rooted in these traditions that I'm sure she's going to really enrich this conversation. Now, I think I've got everybody. Let me get back to the webinar so I can see everybody. So I think now that we've introduced everybody, I'm going to turn it over to Zisl, who's going to give about a 20-minute presentation on Sofia Magid. We'll learn all about Sofia, and then we'll come back and have some panel back and forth between panel members. Okay?
Sure. Thank you, Pete. The first thing is a technical thing. I'm seeing the anonymous attendee asks, why is the chat not working? So I defer to
let's see.
I leave that to you to answer.
Okay, let me see what I can do.
Okay, thank you. And again, back at everyone, I'm absolutely psyched to see my heroes and mentors, the musicians and scholars I've been looking up to, and a lot of you have really shaped who I am professionally. So it is a very special event today for me to be in this company of you and celebrating the issue of the book, of the folio, of the collection, a tiny part, a small part of a collection from by Sofia Magid, who's 2 generations older than me, and very unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet her, but I had an immense privilege to be touched by her legacy and through that by her talent. And it speaks to me on a very personal level. And I'll go back. I'll start with a personal note how I discovered that scholar's name and her legacy. It was 22 years ago when my mentor and scholarly advisor and later research partner, Dr. Nina Stepanskaya of blessed memory, she passed away in 2007. We went to St. Petersburg, Russia, on a scholarly trip, on an official scholarly trip. We worked in libraries in the Russian National Library, the Russian Public Library, in various archives, whatever we could cover in the span of 10 days. And then we returned back in 2004, and we were incredibly lucky to have Nina's not exactly classmate, but rather schoolmate, who was probably a year older than her, Dr. Yuri Marchenko, who was at that time working as a director of the Pushkin House's, the Institute of Russian Arts and Letters Folk Sound Archive. So from get-go, we had this informal conversations with him and opportunity to get informally introduced to these vast riches of the sound archive at the Pushkin House, which are really vast. And so as we started exploring Sofia Magid's work and her biography, what she had achieved, what she had done in the span of her relatively short life. She lived a little over 60 years. By the way, if you're familiar with the name of Moshe Beregovsky, they lived about at the same very time. Their life dates are about the same. I was captivated by the scope of her education, of her erudition, of her scholarly interest, and the depth of her insights and her actual work, her field work, and her writings. And another thing that struck me, and after that I'll tell you a little bit about actually, was that her biography, if you look at it from the kind of career standpoint, is rather unfortunate. That she lived in very unfortunate times when she did not see a lot of her writings published, and they were not published on purpose. So she did, even when she was in evacuation in Kazakhstan during World War II, she did research into Kazakh song. She completed an article and it was never published. It could have been published, but it was not. Her dissertation from 1938, actually defended in 1939, the Ballad in Jewish Folklore, was never published or translated, very unfairly so. And I can keep going on and on. So it's a very underappreciated, unknown, largely unknown scholar of a grand scale that my work is a very modest contribution, and a lot of us here, most of us in this chat, in this webinar room, did our part to address that injustice, to kind of do justice to Magid's legacy in their own way, in their own amazing way, as scholars, as performers, and that's why we are all here. So now back to Sofia Magid. She was born in December 1892, old style, and in 1918, Russia, then communist Russia, before Soviet Union was established, leaped 13 days forward to the new style, Gregorian style. So then 1893. And then she passed away in 1954. She was born into a family of Jewish scholars, going back centuries back, in fact. And I can actually, I'll share. Oh, Pete, could you please let me, and by the way, Joel as well, the
Yep.
chance of sharing my screen. Thank you. So I will share. Oh, I cannot share sound though. Can I share sound? I can't click share sound. It would be lovely to be able to share sound.
Let me
You have to go
see.
into extras or something. There's like a second screen with advanced settings where you can share.
Yeah, let's see. Host and
I
panelists. You
apologize.
should be able to.
It would be lovely if I have a few slides with the sound, so it'd be lovely to be able to do
All right,
that.
hold on.
So I'll keep going then, to not waste our precious time. Her father, in fact, I'll talk a little bit about her father for a second. There was David Magid, David Gilarionovich Magid, was a Jewish scholar, genealogist, and among other things, he contributed a number of articles on Jewish music to the Jewish Encyclopedia, published in St. Petersburg in around 1911 or so. So you can immediately see a major source of inspiration for Sofia Magid, but even more so, her grandfathers and great-grandfathers were rabbis and scholars, Jewish scholars in Vilna, and then going all the way back to Poland. And there's even this one surprise which I want to show when I will have an opportunity to share sound as well. So she went to Petrograd, which was another name, intermediary name for St. Petersburg, between St. Petersburg and Leningrad. It's the same city. Petrograd Conservatoire, which she graduated as a pianist. So she was, a great musician in her own right. But then she got captivated by ethnography, and she graduated the folkloristics courses, or a seminar in right there as well. And she got introduced to a very important, a key figure, which was a very important link to her, and that link in the chain of Jewish ethnography, just born, Zinoviev Zusman Kiselgov, who was part of the Jewish Society for Folk Music, part of Jewish Historical Ethnographic Society, that was started in 1908, together with Joel Engel and Lazar Saminsky and a number of other Jewish composers, scholars, researchers, to the great extent inspired by Rimsky-Korsakov, who symbolically, in a way, passed away in that same year, 1908. And they went to the people. They went to record Jewish music makers mostly in what is now Ukraine and Belarus, in the Pale of Settlement, where there was the greatest concentration of the Jewish population at the time. And Kiselgov continued his work even after the October Revolution, 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, even though there was no funding anymore, but he kept going on predominantly to Belarus, to Mogilov, where he recorded. When he had a phonograph, he kept recording cantors and folk singers. When he did not have equipment, he just used his pencil and paper, but he kept working. And so he met Magid. Magid met him rather in the mid 1920s. And her first expedition, her first fieldwork session happened in 1928. And she initiated that, but she got funded and she was supported at the time. It was before, it was in the rather liberal times, the 1920s, before the 1930s, when Stalin came to real power and things became really hard. But she was able to start her work in 1928. She went to Volyn or Volhynia, to the same, by the way, same places where, Shepetovka, etc., where Dave Terrace came from. He came from Ternovka. It was some 50 kilometers from Shepetovka, Shepetivka, and Polonne. That's where she recorded some wonderful violinists and folk singers and Hasidic men singing nigunim, and so basically she covered most of the genres in the course of just one expedition. She covered most of the most important genres of Jewish music at the time, save for art music, of course. And then the Russian Institute of for the History of Arts, or the State Institute of the History of Arts, was or disbanded. It was not disbanded. It disbanded the folklore section. So the folklore section was basically transferred to the aforementioned Pushkin House, the Institute of Russian Arts and Letters, and so did Magid. Sofia Magid also got hired as a junior researcher at the Pushkin House Folklore Sound Archive, working together with Rybakov and other outstanding Russian folklorists at the time. And so she continued her expeditions. It's that just her interest and her work at that point started including not only Jews. She managed to record 18 ethnic groups in the Soviet Union, including, she went a lot to Karelia. She went to, like I said, she worked in Kazakhstan during World War II. She went to various regions in Leningrad Oblast and Novaya Luki already after the war, and other places. So she carried out about 20 expeditions and recorded hundreds of people. And her legacy, that part of her legacy has yet to be, I was going to say has yet to be discovered. Her Jewish part of legacy has yet to be discovered properly, but non-Jewish legacy with 17 other ethnic groups, including Native Americans. Well, that was some spoken word, was some odd occurrence of some delegation of Native Americans being in Leningrad. So she recorded some native spoken word by Native Americans. Who knows? I never had a chance to listen. And it was very clearly mislabeled or how do I say it? Yeah, mislabeled basically. But that's not, so what is important is that her scope of her interest was vast. And she really captured Russian folk music, Ukrainian folk music, Karelian, the various Finno-Ugric ethnic groups, folk musics at the time, in the time of political and historical turmoil, as Karelia was basically annexed by the Soviet Union after the Winter War, and all those dramatic events. She was able to capture traditional music as all these events were unfolding. So she conducted several expeditions to southeastern Belarus, primarily Mogilov and Homel region, Oblast. Oblast is a larger administrative unit, akin to maybe, well, it's hard to tell, it's between states and counties, but then there are rayon. Rayon is more like a county. And she recorded people. They are people of all ages, of all vocations, of all occupational backgrounds, musicians and non-people of double occupations, musicians doubling as someone else, and solely musicians, retired musicians, men, women, children. She was the only ethnographer among the small handful. We're really talking about a very small handful of ethnographers who documented Jewish music making at the time. along with Moisei Beregovsky and Zinovi Kiselgov, and Joel Engel a generation earlier, who documented an ensemble, a band of fiddles in Propoysk, now Slavgorod, in Mogilev Oblast, now it's Chernobyl zone. A family fiddle band, which is really gives us an insight and it confirms what we know from other sources about the styles of various functions of the fiddles in the fiddle ensemble, secund, accompaniment, or solo. It does confirm that. Her recordings give us an invaluable window into performing style. What we don't know, how vast the territory that style covered was. Because style begins with an individual and it can cover a family, a village, a town, and some administrative unit, or go beyond that, which I think was the case. But exactly how widespread that style was, it's really hard to tell because, like I said, there was very few recordings in existence. There are very few recordings in existence. So Moisei Beregovsky predominantly focused on Ukraine, also not all of Ukraine, of course. First of all, Ukraine and Belarus were split into the Soviet and Polish, or some of it Czechoslovakian, Romanian part, between two world wars. So all of these Soviet researchers were not able to go to the non-Soviet parts. It was a Iron Curtain, so to speak. And Jewish scholarship was not really supported in that way in the non-Soviet parts. It's a separate conversation, which I'm happy to talk, but not now. And then even in that Soviet parts of Belarus and Ukraine, they just were able to cover that much. I mean, we should also be aware of the technical resources that they have. They didn't have all the fancy cars and all the, pocket digital recorders and all this high resolution video cameras and everything. It was very much the opposite. Very low tech and very, heavy equipment and absence of good roads or roads at all. That's why when you look at the dates of when Magid went to record, Beregovsky for that matter as well, to record people, it was mainly in the summertime, because that's when you could get through that mud that was dried up into the roads, so to speak. Which is also a shame. So we don't know if there was any difference between what people would play or sing in the summertime as opposed to winter or springtime. Definitely maybe some Purim songs or something that would be inspired to sing. We'll know that Slavic folklore is very rigidly attached to the calendar, and they would actually intone, they would sing very differently at different parts of the year. There's no way any ethnographer in the world could ask any actual folk singers in a Belarusian or Ukrainian village for people to sing in the spring mode, in the middle of August. There's no way, or it would be very inauthentic. So we don't know. We don't know how much was not covered. What we do know, what is covered, what was documented by Magid and Beregovsky and Kiselgov, is a very small amount, but a very precious information that we now can gradually get our hands on. What else? I mean, I wrote this introduction to this book, and this book only includes, the book that I present today only includes 40 instrumental tunes. Some of them were sung vocally, but attributed as instrumental tunes. There was one retired klezmer, one retired musician who just sang some of the tunes. So those were transcribed from the vocal recordings. So just to get an idea, so Magid, over the course of her career as an ethnomusicologist, she recorded over 1,700 pieces, Jewish and non, from all ethnic groups that she documented. Of those, about 500 something, 550 come from the Jews. So out of them, about 100 are instrumental pieces. So this is volume 1. That's why I put volume 1 here. So there'll hopefully be volume 2. I have all these pieces transcribed. I just have to sit down and work and revise and do all this work again. So that's the quick history, quick biography. There's a wonderful and growing Wikipedia article on Magid now, thanks to Daniel Karkner, a wonderful librarian and historian of Jewish music from Vancouver in British Columbia. He's currently in residency at YIVO at New York City doing his research, and he is here in our session as well, not as a panelist, but attending this webinar. Because there was very scarce information about that wonderful scholar. Like I said, life was very unfair to her. She was chastised multiple times, especially after the war, when she attempted to record the Jews, but she did not find anybody, quite predictably so. Beregovsky did an attempt too. He was a little luckier. He recorded some 70 songs after the war. And then she went on to record Russians in Leningrad Oblast, but she was reprimanded and then ultimately let go from Pushkin House for unsatisfactory work, basically cited for unprofessionalism, that she failed to record socialist songs about World War II or Great Patriotic War, as it was labeled by Stalin, and the Soviet period. Although she did record such songs, she honestly did her work as an ethnomusicologist to the best of her ability. But basically she was kicked out from her work and she did not survive. It was a really brutal time. If you think about that time, we're talking 1947, 1949. That was exactly the time when, Zhdanov basically sentenced Shostakovich and Prokofiev and Myaskovsky, all the greatest Soviet composers. And we know Prokofiev died soon after, Myaskovsky died soon after, Shostakovich almost committed suicide at the time. It was brutal time for Soviet literati. Including musicians, not only musicians, of course. And Magid was among those who did not survive it. She was not sent to Gulag like Beregovsky. So she was a little luckier, but just a little. And again, while Beregovsky's legacy was discovered and given justice by Mark Slobin and other scholars in the field in the early 80s and translated into English, published, Magid's legacy still awaits such work. And again, with this modest contribution, I hope it's just the very beginning. Again, we're talking about a small fraction of Magid's recordings, and there's her dissertation, and there are articles that she wrote, not only on Jewish music. I think it's of incredible value, really, to her work. Her other work is of incredible value because it gives a systemic insight in her approach as an ethnographer, as a scholar, of her depth and breadth of her work. So I think I'll wrap up here.
Okay, thank you, Zisl.
Yes.
Very good, and it's so exciting. This book is such an important contribution in getting.
Oh, and before I'm sorry, just one more sentence. I really want to thank first and foremost Christina Crowder, who really encouraged and inspired me to do it last August when we worked on Trip to Yiddishland, the Workers' Circle program, and here in upstate New York, because I had my writer's block, or set of I cannot do it because. And Christina totally broke it for me. She said, "No, you can do it, and you can just self-publish," which I did, and just why not? And I thought, you know what? I don't care for anything else but making this available to everybody. And that's what happens. So thank you, Christina.
It's my pleasure.
Great. And actually, as long as we have Christina in the spotlight, do you want to comment on anything that Zisl spoke about or introduce anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, you know me. I mean, I'm all about open access and making things available and the thing that I took away from our conversations, Zisl, was just finding setting out to do the entire PhD thesis is a huge amount of work, but it was more about well, you already know what your favorite tunes are. right? So why don't you just do those ones, and then the rest can now follow. And I think that's a great way to get started on these projects. Is just take a little bit and then go, and then it begins to build its own momentum. What I love about this collection, and I have to confess that I haven't explored it to its fullest extent quite yet, is that it's what I have seen and what I have looked at is really makes me excited about having access to more of what I would call like the sort of northern repertoire. And I've been reading a lot of that in the Kisselhoff corpus, and we've been exploring a lot of these things that Zev talks about in his book about the North and the South, the klezmer North and the klezmer South. And from speaking only for myself, I grew up in the sort of milieu of the Southern repertoire, which would be, our beloved Terrace and Brandwein. And then for me, also a lot of Moldavian music and that sort of crossover music. So having access to more of this more northerly repertoire is really exciting to me. It supplements that small collection from Kisselhoff of 1913. It's being amplified by what we're finding in the Kisselhoff corpus. And then now this corpus, I think, is important because it also ties to recordings. And so I think in the fullness of time, being able to sort of put together for ourselves what the sounds are like and how they translate onto the page will be very informative for the work that we do in the Kisselhoff corpus, which is much more speculative, because we don't have those recorded resources. So I think that's my opening thing that I would say about what we're discovering here. And also just bravo, Zisl, this is so awesome.
Thank you, Christina. Cookie is...
Yes, I just want to say that the way the book is laid out with the different regions was incredibly helpful to me just as a musician. And what I'm kind of thinking about while you were talking about this is how so many times I'm one of probably the least academic person on this panel. But so much backstory after I've performed, recorded, studied a piece just for what it is. There's so much backstory, and it's kind of really interesting, somebody like you, Zisl, because you're not only a researcher, you're a musician, to it's kind of inspired me to kind of learn more about what I'm playing. I mean, just to speak simply, oftentimes I just attack a tune because I like it, and I don't know anything about it, and I study it as just the music. And, I'm kind of feeling like, and I live with a person similar to you, but I don't always take advantage of that academic stuff that is, it's so informative even to the way the music should be performed. So, bravo.
Thank you, Cookie. And I'm flattered by saying that you live with a person similar to me. So,
and I don't just mean losing hair and wearing glasses.
Well, that happens as well. But I think it's a great, as a musician, I should say it's a great and totally valid approach to be enchanted by music. It happened to me more than once, not just with Jewish music, with a lot of classical early music pieces, that I was inspired by music, and then I would start studying its history and background and everything. I think first and foremost, if music doesn't cut it, nothing else matters.
Right, and then one thing about the Magid recordings, in the family you're talking about, the family of fiddlers, to hear how they backed each other up, what just blew the top off my head, because it was not the way that we imagined Sakun to be. It was higher range. It was more like, in the same range as the melody. We've always told students, play way low so you're not in the way of the melody. And it wasn't that way on the recording. And I kind of went, what? So it was really, fantastic to have those recordings.
It's really a blessing that we have that set of recordings. We are really huge luck. Yes.
Actually, maybe I would invite others from Voretsky Pass who contributed to the Voretsky Pass Magid album. Were there kind of resonances from seeing Zisl's publication on how you thought about that project? Because you did, how many years ago has it been since that project?
That was 6 years ago.
6 years ago, okay.
We actually recorded it 7 years ago.
But we started working on it about
11 years ago.
9 years ago or something. Yeah.
We're slow.
Well, we're a very chatty bunch.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a very collaborative process, and we each, went through the whole corpus and picked out our favorite tunes and sent them around to each other, and then it's kind of like a Venn diagram, what you end up with, the ones that we could all kind of get behind.
Well, yeah, and I just want to say I love the book also, and it's on really good paper stock. I love that you formatted it so that section beginnings are on the left side, and it's really easy. It's lovely. It's really a great, and the introduction and the information that's on each at the top of each thing is really helpful. We don't have to fish around for all that stuff. I think it's just a wonderful work. When Cookie was talking about the violinists, I know that ensemble, that family were basically, amateurs. So, that we as performers and researchers bemoan the fact that there is so little information about ensemble work and harmony, that it's just left out of the studies that we have. And so, we have to go by the recordings, of course. So this is an example, but, it was an amateur ensemble, and we need a statistic sampling big enough to really make any conclusions about how professional ensembles dealt with fiddle things like that. So it's a start, though, that we have that, and that you notated it also, which is really nice, I think, for fiddlers. And also all that's there. One thing I want to ask you, Zisl, is I know that Magid did work on Jewish ballads. And I remember Izali Zamsovsky, when he visited me in Austria in 93, mentioned that he had discovered Jewish epic ballads that were, it's kind of a missing link in the Slavic world, because we have them in other cultures. We have Wallachian ones, we have, all over, but we didn't have Jewish, like these epic ballads that went on for, stanza after stanza. And I was wondering if you knew anything about those. It's like, he said that they had Hebrew letters. I don't remember if it was actually Hebrew or Yiddish, but she had written about that, and I don't know if there's any information about it.
Yeah, there's plenty of information, and I would definitely pass the microphone to Michael Lukin, who wrote amazing articles, amazing research, following other articles by Alexander Frankel earlier in the St. Petersburg editions, Russian editions. But to go to the very source, to Magid's work per se, yes, she focused on the ballad. That was the topic of her doctoral dissertation, like I said before, that she wrote in 1937-38, defended in 1939. And the actual musical analysis, as denoted in Michael's recent article, takes about 10% of her overall work. And just to give an idea of what we're talking about, like 40 pages out of 400 something pages. So it's a massive, massive work that she did. So that's a musical analysis. And then it all went into oblivion till 1990s, when there was that project with the Dutch linguist Jaap de Graaf, who came to St. Petersburg, and he collaborated with the St. Petersburg State University with the German languages department, Professor Natalia Svetozarova, and part of his work was digitizing the archives. So he was instrumental, and he also brought, honestly, money to digitize and other means, resources to digitize the archives that were otherwise transferred to tapes in the 1970s by the Pushkin House staff, but were sitting still on the shelves. So it was not only that, but also there was a research that I believe Leonid Guralnik did, and he made excellent transcriptions, which I saw with my own eyes, very detailed ethnographic transcriptions of 24 ballads, epic ballads, mostly epic. I think I'm not ready to say if all of them were epic ballads at this point, but I also saw Nina Stepanska and we went into Dr. Svetozarova's office, and she showed us the digitized project on the screen of her computer there. So those ballads were represented in the form of musical transcriptions or notation, oscillogram, sonograms, all possible representations that were available at the time that represent those ballads from those recordings from all sides possible. So that was just one really scrupulous insight into this one part of Sofia Magid's research, and that was actually ballads that were of great interest for her in her dissertation, which I had a chance to read 20 years ago in St. Petersburg. She does a great deal of comparative analysis. She compares them to Dutch ballads, German ballads, English balladry. She had a very good understanding of European balladry and large, so she made an attempt to place Jewish ballad, Eastern Ashkenazic Jewish ballads into the framework of European balladry. And correct or not, because then Mikhail Lukin, again, he'll probably speak next, tried to give it a thought of what really Jewish ballad was, given Magid's, but not only Magid's work in the field. Mikhail, maybe you'll talk a little bit about that.
So Zev raising his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Zev.
Go ahead, Zev.
Just to make a point of terminology, ballads are not necessarily epics. And I mean, I could ask, I talk to Izali, I communicate with Izali quite often. And since his wife, Alma Kunanbaeva, is a great expert in epic, in the Kazakh culture where they have epic. But you have to remember, I also worked on epic in Turkic cultures, that epics are professional genres. And that a culture that has epic has a professional who specializes in epic. Jews didn't have that. There was no such professional.
Skazители. Yeah, right.
No, we didn't have that, no.
Right.
So Mikhail, of course, did great work with balladry, but that's another species, it's another genre than epic per se. If anybody has come across a Yiddish epic, that would be, quite wonderful, but I'm not aware. Recently I was writing something about one of my mentors when I was young, who was a mountain Jew from Dagestan, Zevulon Avshalomov, and he claimed to have learned Dastan Melech Ashur, the epic of the king of Assyria, in the Tati language. But he never let anybody record it, period. So it seems to have died with him. And how he learned it, if he learned it, was also a mystery, because that was, he knew lyrical balladry from Azerbaijanis and so forth. But it's interesting that he claims there was such a thing among the mountain Jews, but I've never heard of anybody confirming that.
Well, probably, next person I would talk to would be Valery Dymshitz, who did a great deal of research into the mountain Jews folklore.
Yeah. Well, but of course there was like zero contact between Ashkenazim and the mountain Jews.
Right. So someone in Kuba, Krasnye Selo.
I got to know the guy in Brooklyn.
Well, Zev, when we say epic, an epic ballad, isn't that usually talk about a very, very long story that involves a hero doing heroic things? Is that how you define it?
I wouldn't confuse ballad and epic. I mean, I did my dissertation on epic. And in the cultures that I studied, epic was, it was a thing. That's what they learned when they were young, and that's what they performed. And it was quite different than any other kind of, any kind of performance. So balladry, as we know, many cultures, the Irish, the English, many cultures have balladry. It's not necessarily connected with a very developed epic. I'm talking about, the Turkic epics I'm talking about would fill like, good part of a book if we were to write them down. So these are different things, and I guess I'm not aware that Yiddish-speaking Jews in recent centuries had such a thing, but Mikhail is much more of the expert on this than I am.
No, thank you, Zev. It's really,
Sure.
really, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can
Kyle, you
add.
want to go ahead? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make a short comment, and then I have a series of questions to Zisl. So regarding the epic and the ballads, so Jews, Yiddish speakers developed a rich tradition of biblical epics. So it was a written epic, and this existed
Yeah.
until the early modern period. And I think that that was one of the reasons that Yiddish speakers didn't develop an oral epic tradition. However, Magid suggested that there was a Yiddish Spielman. This is a long story with the Spielman theory. And she could identify in some of the ballads about for example, she documented a ballad about the Hannah Ditznuyem, and other biblical, few maybe other biblical personas. So she suggested that maybe these short ballads are some remnants of a bigger epic tradition. We don't know. And by the way, speaking of the Persian realm, we do have at our National Sound Archives and our National Library of Israel an audio recording of the Persian Jewish epic. So it could somehow correspond to that Mountain Jews epic singing, but this takes us too far, I think, from from our publication that we are discussing and celebrating today. So my questions to Zisl are as following. First of, congratulations. It's really, I agree, and let me join to all the congratulations. It's really significant publication. So we know this book by Elvira Grotzinger from 2008 with all the transcriptions of Magid's recordings. As far as I know, and as far as I remember, they published transcriptions of the cylinders, whereas you are talking about cassettes. So I wonder why did they decide not to include your materials in their publication? What dictated their decision, and whether maybe you know if all the wax cylinders were copied to the cassettes or not. And I'll explain the background to this question. So I examined the audio recordings and these transcriptions. And if I were Magid, I'm not sure I would choose them for publication, because many of them do not, they differ from the materials that Berigovsky chose to publish, and that he really thought that it would be valuable to represent, to introduce to the general public, because many of them are pan-Eastern European. They are not specifically Belarusian, maybe, and they are not very much traditional. They are suitable for playing in restaurants, such as the da 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 da, or this tune of was Bisto Kotniki Baroiges, or other tunes that are maybe more suitable for a large band orchestras and less for the traditional klezmer ensembles. And having said that, I'm really happy that you brought it to to our knowledge, and that you did publish this. So what is the difference between your materials and those published by Grotzinger, if you could?
I just want to interject that that publication by Elvira Grotzinger at the University of Potsdam, there were a whole bunch of people who worked on it. The CD-ROM that comes with the publication includes all of the klezmer all 96 or whatever it is of the klezmer instrumental recordings. They just didn't transcribe them.
But thank you, Joel. So does this CD include also those that Zisl published here?
Yeah, that's all there is.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. That's absolutely going to say that. And this is the total total of number the instrumental tunes that Magid recorded, about 96, as you, yeah, under 100. So I cannot speak to what was the exact criterion for Elvira Grötzinger's choice and her partner in writing, but their research was specifically in the song, the folk song, and they did not focus on solely on Magid's collection. They also included Beregovsky's collection that is partially preserved, kept at the Pushkin House as well. It was digitized there as well. It was split between the Kiev Vernadsky Library and the Pushkin House, basically. So I did not want to touch songs, partially for that reason, although I was not exactly happy with the transcriptions that I saw in that edition. They could have been, I totally understand that the quality is, mildly speaking, subpar on the scratchy recordings, but also those a lot of them are, like you said about the instrumental pieces, are known songs, say Beroskale or stuff like that, and I know you can't really write that's unidentifiable or something, so you should invoke some cross reference to other sources that would make that song known to, because it's a known song. So one example, and then the main criterion for my choice. I mean, there's not much to choose from. First of all, my objective is to publish all of instrumental pieces. So it was, Christina advised me to just start with something more kind of local, a smaller scale, something I could, split it basically into several parts. And because there's not so much material, so I decided to split it into two parts. So 96 goes with 40, and then respectively 54 that will follow. Oh, 56, I'm sorry, that will follow eventually. And that's the criterion. So it's not about the pieces, played by whoever, individual musicians, bands, professionals, non-professionals, etc. It doesn't matter. So my main objective was to make accessible, make public that Magid's collection. And then what I could also work on, and I'm willing to work on, are Hasidic nigunim. Because I already mentioned that, it was quite fascinating that one of the notable, well-known Hasidic singers here in New York, with whom I happened to work in one of my Hasidic gigs, he reached out to me and he said he would be excited to work with me on one such program. And I thought to myself, that would be absolutely exciting, absolutely amazing. Like this, as in this material making full circle, coming from Hasidic singers in Ukraine and some from Belarus, and being performed by an actual Hasidic singer in New York. It makes a lot of sense to me. It makes it so authentic and important. And he had done some such project before with some Munkach nigunim and some like lesser known nigunim before. So it's an important work as well, and I'm very encouraged and feel encouraged and inspired to do it. Then also to address that sociological kind of split, let me respectfully disagree with you about that split. I think it's a bit superficial. What matters to me is who performed those pieces at a given moment. So if we hear some, as you put it, restaurant music or more traditional music from that same performer, well, that was recorded probably prior to cassette culture period, as put by Peter Manuel, right? But prior to media culture, when people learned some of the tunes from radio, from television, from cassettes, etc. But it doesn't matter because it represents. It's like a picture, a photo, a documentation of that particular culture at that particular historical period. And that's what matters to us. So this is when Magid set out to record those people in the 1928 to 1938. So we don't know. Magid did not, unfortunately, did not supply her record. So what we did not have is the additional information of how people learned those tunes. We don't know. Somebody asked me in the chat, I'm just glancing over the chat, were there any notations? She did transcribe some ballads because she worked on them for the purpose of her dissertation. But she, to the best of my knowledge, she did not transcribe other tunes. So she only collected them. So this is the work to be done. This is the work to be done. And again, my objective is to publish all of it and supply with as full information as I possess, all I have, from Magid's own passportization, attribution of those tunes. There was this database that Dr. Marchenko handed over to me, as a Microsoft Access file. So that gives us information about the date of birth, if applicable, if she had this. It's not, most of her sources anyway. Date of birth, occupation, gender, this and this, all the information about the performers. And also some of them were refugees from some wars from Poland. That's important. So some of them were Polish Jews who ended up in Ukraine. That's important because that's some imported repertoire that shows that maybe some repertoire was migrating together with its bearers. So my aim is to truthfully convey as much information as I can, and then also invoke some of relevant information from other sources, such as other collections, Beregovsky or others, and other related sources, other publications. So I guess that's my answer.
Okay.
Just a short question.
Oh, go ahead, Magid.
The last short question: have you understood why the accompanying information is so scarce? So it's quite. She was an experienced ethnographer and ethnomusicologist. Didn't she ask questions about context? I don't know. It's
Fantastic
very
question.
information.
It's exactly my question as well, and my healthy assumption is that she did, and that some of her diaries did not make it to, or I did not find them. I was not shown them. I didn't find them. One of her entire expeditions worth of materials were dislocated somewhere, maybe in the archives of the Pushkin House, and unfortunately, to me personally, those made in Minsk. So she did go to Minsk, and then the other time to Mazir in the south of Belarus, another expedition from 1934, and I think of the top of my head, 40-something recordings just disappeared. They're not to be found, and I doubt that it will be ever found. It's a shame, really, and we don't have any information about them. So my assumption, a healthy assumption, of course, my assumption that she did ask questions. We don't have. They probably were in a separate diaries somewhere. What I was presented, what Dr. Marchenko shared with me was her actual database, or the biographical data, and then the archival numbers, all that filled out in ink on paper by her. That I saw, but not any other supplemental information, which I really miss, just like all of us. So we have raised hands from Josh and Joel. So Josh?
Yeah, well, I hope this isn't off topic too much, but I'm so glad that we have a panel here of people that I can ask this question to, because it's been a kind of a question that's been burning in my mind for a long time. And that is, the mention has been made about Northern versus Southern repertoire. And I'm so curious as to what the criteria we have for that. We know that so much of the material is overlapping between all of the publications and the recordings that we have. What is the distinction that we make? Is it on the basis of modality? Is it something else? But I hear it, and I want to determine it myself. But every time I try to say, oh, well, this is from Kisselhoff and he's North and whatever, I find the same tune, in another thing that's deemed Southern. So if anybody can help with that, we have a panel of experts here who may know this, and I would love to hear it. And you, Zisl, coming from the so-called North a little bit, what are we talking about? Yeah, I got great. I've got other hands up.
Yeah, look, I'm the guilty party. I invented that terminology.
Well, no blame there.
Okay, and in doing my research, predominantly I was working with the Southern material, and that's what most of Beregovsky did, and most of our recordings. And in my chapter in my book about North and South, I point out that in America, the South killed off the North very quickly, and that you could see it almost decade by decade, where it was possible for a Northern klezmer to have an audience before the First World War, very difficult afterwards. There were stylistic differences between North and South. There were terminological differences. It's very important. When I worked with a musician from Vilna in Yerushalayim, for him, even the word freilachs was very foreign. You know, I had to explain to him what was a freilach. And again, in my chapter, I show certain features, certain tunes where there's archetypical difference in the North and the South. What I show in that some of the Northern tunes show relations with older manuscripts of klezmer music even from the 18th and early 19th century, coming as far as German sources. And my impression is that in general, the Jews in the South had much more, let's say, they were interacting more with music that interested them in the South. And it caused certain changes on many levels, with everything from length of musical phrases, even to what I talk about rhythmic cycles in some of the longer tunes. And also, don't forget that in contradistinction to the klezmer repertoires, the Hasidic repertoires are much more differentiated locally, much more. And that was a point that the Hasidic Rebbes wanted to make their repertoires different from other repertoires. And so I did a bit of study in Israel with the Chabad material. I even interviewed a Chabad singer in Lod. And there was no secret that, Chabad is very distinctive, and they had branches in the South, and where they composed very different style of what the Southern composers, which, although they were known in the North. But, and Beregovsky, if you look at Beregovsky's Nigun collection, it's a wonderful collection from Ukrainian Hasidim. So anyway, you have to bear all these things in mind. But, and again, it's until we go through, we really study Magid's material, we've had no choice but to do much more depth on the Southern klezmer repertoire.
Can I give a little vibey, like a little bit more of a vibey distinction that's more experiential, maybe to get at what Josh is talking about. And I'm going to admit that this is still my first draft of this idea, but there's like the ideas tend to be a little bit more straightforward, a little bit on the nose musically, in my experience so far. And like I said, this is my first draft of this. A little bit more straightforward. There's a lot more like the trick. There's a lot of the use of kind of clever musical devices to keep whatever it is interesting. The quality that we keep finding in the play along sessions where we're reading through the Kisselhoff materials is that once you get started playing these tunes, they're very hard to stop playing. They don't give you much of an opportunity to get out of them, which is a great quality in a tune, but it's kind of but it's like I'm saying, it's a little bit of a different vibe. The musical, there's not as much development musically in terms of like modulation. There is modulation, but there's less.
Christina, could you just clarify when you're talking about North versus South? It's a little hard
This
to
is
figure
all
out.
I'm talking about. The Northern repertoire has all of these features of being a little bit more simple, a little bit more sort of using very like innocuous but like very clever tricks. Like they're not evolved modulatory musical development sort of concepts that we get in the kind of more, call it Southern repertoire. But the use of these little tricks are very compelling. These tunes are really fun, and they're really compelling, and they're really easy to keep you moving and dancing. And also there's a lot more that I see of uneven measure counts, like 5, 7, 9, 10, 13. Like the measure counts are all over the place in the parts and sections. And it just seems like between us, maybe modern 20th century people tending to like even things out into 8-bar phrases, and or also this an idea that the Southern repertoire was much more like regulated and even into these 8-bar chunks or big longer phrases like we're used to seeing in like the Belf Chassidel and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's Josh. Does that get a little bit at what you're asking about?
No,
Okay.
but
Joel had his hand up before I
no,
did.
only because no, I'm just joking, really, Christine. But I just would like to know like which tunes or which devices we're talking about, because I mean, we could talk about like the Moderator and the Gur Hasidim have a lot of things in 3, which you don't, like waltzes and things like that, you don't find down there. You got a little more major keys. There is all that kind of stuff that's kind of obvious. But when we get to the Kieselhoff stuff, it's not any obvious to me anymore. So I'd love to see like the sampling of, okay, this sounds Northern, this sounds Yiddish in that realm.
Like I said, this is the first draft of this idea for me, and I know for a fact that in the Kisselhoff corpus that we're working with, or that I tend to work with the most,
Well,
like I will be coming up with like, I think this is from the North and I think this is from the South based on what we're seeing.
I would love to have a symposium just on that. Anyway, Joel's burning.
Have a symposium.
This is totally impressionistic, in my opinion. I think we need to zoom the camera way out and look at this as a chronological phenomenon. And I think if we look at the way the klezmer music we know from the 20th and now 21st century, is that if we're going to follow what Berezovsky has written and what Stuchevsky and some of the other scholars, is that klezmer music developed in the North, and that the musicians, as they were looking for better pastures, more work or whatever, gradually migrated southwards and eastwards. So there's an argument to be made that the so-called Northern repertoire would be an older layer of repertoire that's perhaps simpler. Maybe it has fewer sections. Maybe it has no modulations or simpler modulations. Maybe it has shorter sections, this sort of thing. But because the music is so mobile, and again, this is before cassette culture and all this other stuff, is that none of our sources are old enough. So it's all mixed together. By the time we're looking at even the oldest manuscripts from, say, the Kisselhoff collection or whatever, it's already bled, it's all mixed together. So I think our idea of, well, this is from the North and this is from the South, it's very impressionistic. I don't think we have any hard criteria, actually.
Absolutely agree.
Joel, but you're ignoring the very early klezmer manuscripts.
But that's not klezmer, in my opinion. I mean, those are like German sources. Yeah, there's elements of klezmer in there, but it's coming from such.
Berezovsky was not a historical ethnomusicologist.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So don't trust anything that he says historically. He was not. And you have to remember the klezmer profession began in the South.
Mm-hmm.
It began in Czechia. And
so this is one of the biggest lacuna in the whole thing, is we don't know the connection between, maybe it developed down there, but we have no idea how it got then to the North and how it developed first.
It moved first of all
later to the North and then moved again south.
You have to understand demographics of Yiddish Jews and follow the latest research in the Yiddish language.
Mm-hmm.
If you follow Alexander Beider, for example, in Paris, it's pretty clear that was a demographic movement of the speakers of the Yiddish language, because the Jews living in the North until the 16th century were not speaking Yiddish.
Yeah.
They were speaking Rus. And they were expelled in 1495. There was an expulsion of the Jews from most of Eastern Europe. Right? Some of them went to Poland, some of them went to the Crimea, and there was a huge opportunity for Yiddish speakers to come in from the Czech areas into Poland and Lithuania. And with them, you see the klezmer profession. It's documented already by the late 16th century in Poland, then the 17th century in other parts of Galicia. So, of course, we don't have the repertoire, but we certainly have the movement of the profession. And it's striking that the Jews who spoke Yiddish only used that word, klezmer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word. It was understood everywhere from Czechia to Vilna.
This is true.
Yep.
I have a cookie.
Yep.
Two things. I want to, and I said this before, I want to introduce the possibility and probability that many local styles developed because of a lead fiddler in town. And we know when it comes to old time music here, you're playing the J.P. Fraley style. You're playing this and that. You know, even Bruce Molsky is playing a West Virginia style. And, you know, in the case of a Polish, I was interviewing a guy about Polish fiddling styles, and the fiddler there, when I heard a recording, I said, is that a C or a C sharp? He didn't understand the question. So I said, is it this? He said, no. I played a C. Then I play a C sharp. No. So I play in between a C and a C sharp. He goes, yeah. I said, what do you call that? He goes, it calls it a 2 because he's using his second finger, and his second finger was missing the tip because of a farm machinery accident. So every fiddler in the town played that way. And so my feeling as just a lay, you know, a non-academic player, but somebody who has studied many fiddle styles, I think we have to really enter that element of local styles being set by the lead musician in town. Wait, I'm not done yet. Then you can give me a shry. That's fine. The other thing is I want to ask you, Zisl, and it's a little off topic, why your choice of harmonies had so many 7ths and flat 5s and blah, 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 all those things. And I'm asking that out of total love and curiosity. Because for me, you know, it was a little bit more westernized harmony than... So I'm just curious.
Right, trying to find where I put in a flat 5.
There was like a 7 flat 5, and I got scared because I don't even know how to play that.
Oh,
But-
so I mean, semi-diminished chord. It's like a no.
Oh,
Yes,
well,
Dominic,
there you
you
go.
have one on page 59
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
on the Volach.
Okay. Okay. Yes, DM. So that's like a subdominant, basically. No, 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 no.
Right. Once you say, you know, diminished 7, I understand it, but
It's not-
it
it's
felt like
feminine.
they were a little modern. Some of the harmonies were a little tiny bit modern.
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
Well, I just want to. I'm
I
going to be
mean-
dealing with that, by the way, tomorrow in my harmony class. For if you
I
play
mean-
an F minor chord, which would normally be there, but you have a D played in the bass, then you get that chord.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah. So it is definitely a phenomenon that occurs. You know, in the music. I know that. I mean, it's a choice, but
well, let me just finish this question. Was
Yeah,
it
yeah.
something that you heard on some of the recordings, or you just
No,
because
it
I
was
didn't?
my
Yeah.
choice. Was my
Okay.
choice.
That was really my
No,
question.
I'm saying, you know, I hold full responsibility for everything I wrote in this book. So I'm not denying that, but I'm saying that it was my choice that was not exactly informed by some historic sources. Just
Just
to
how
remind-
you would play it, basically.
this tune came from a solo violin recording, so we have no
So
idea.
we don't have any right.
We don't have any idea. These are all suggestions, by the way. Everyone who's watching this, no, Zoom or recording on YouTube later, feel free to, make your suggestions. It's not,
Of course,
you know,
of course.
not a
Yeah,
Ten
I
Commandments.
was just curious about that. I mean, I know sometimes in some historical things they would just put the melody, and you know, you were so careful in writing out like in this. Was it the Solodkin family? Is that the fiddlers?
Yes.
Yeah,
yeah.
you wrote out each
Solodkin.
person's part very carefully, and you know
Yes.
that was so lovely. I was just curious about it. I know some people will just make it very simple and
No,
not
thank you thank you for asking. It's a great question. The purpose of this book, first and foremost, was for to give an opportunity to the players, to the musicians, to play it in the band. So therefore,
Got
I
it.
also made a B flat key of B flat version. I didn't.
Oh.
I didn't. Resort to going to E flat and F and whatever, but at least a lot of instruments are in the key of B flat, such as clarinets, trumpets, tenor, soprano, saxophones. So quite a lot of instruments, especially B flat clarinets are some,
Right.
emblematic klezmer instrument of the modern era. As much as problematic the word emblematic is, we're not going into that. So I created that. So it's very practical, and it's not. So a lot of these transcriptions are also, I'm very aware, they're not accurate from the standpoint of ethnographic transcription. I think Joel Rubin did a great presentation, which I had a chance to watch after the fact at Yiddish New York, because our presentation was almost at the same time on the same day. So he broke it down into different types of transcription. And my goal was very clear. It was very practical. It was performance chart, bandstand chart. And
Got it.
let them go. Get it out in the world and let people play it.
Perfect.
Speaking of
Great.
let me just say, speaking of which, Zisl, can you actually put a link in the chat for people to purchase the book before we forget
Absolutely, yes.
to do that obvious piece
Little
of
marketing.
Yeah,
Oh,
Joel, do you have a question?
Well,
or
I was just
comment?
going to say, I think that the transcriptions, they're somewhere in between. So some of them are would be very easy to adapt for the bandstand. Some of them almost have too much information in terms of like variables of rhythmic, they're really performance aspects rather than the tune itself that I think might make it more difficult especially for say amateur musicians or whatever to work with. But I think, in general, it works really well. I just wanted to come back to like what was to me the exciting part about working with the Magid materials. And I think we both had the same source. Was it the guy in St. Petersburg, right? So I got an old cassette.
Well, Dr. Marchenko, I mean, yeah, but
I don't know who, well, that's probably what it was originally from, but this is like 30 years ago or something. Somebody handed me a cassette of this stuff.
Oh, no, I got the actual digitized versions after
This was
1999.
before digitization.
So yeah, they're different sources then.
But we have all these tantalizing not transcriptions, manuscripts from the Kiselov collection from Beregovsky. We know Beregovsky made all these recordings of of a lot of sort of genres that we don't have, that kind of disappeared in more of the modern era. So especially the sort of 3/4 time pieces, kind of slow 3/4, what we might call Dobry Den for lack of a better term, and in slow 4/4. And we know Beregovsky made some of these recordings, but they haven't been published. We don't have access to them. Maybe we'll have access to them at some point if the war ever ends and all of these other things that are going on. But so this was exciting to me, was the one that you published in your book as number 23. It says a chassid melodia.
Yes.
In the Grutzinger edition, it's actually identified as Dobry Den. So I don't know if that was their own interpretation or if they had some other material that they were drawing from for this title. But it's an interesting because it's a very, very slow. So one of the things that really got me excited was hearing like how slow is. It's much slower than any of us imagined. And also hearing like a tune, so this is a very widely spread, well-known tune, right? We know most of us knew it originally in the version by the Abe Schwartz Orchestra by Rubin Suda with Naftali Brandwein on the clarinet, but we later discovered there were versions by Belf, and then Zev found a version by Christian musicians in, I think, Moldavia, right?
Yeah,
And
but those are derived from the Jewish. They're not, the Jewish is the original.
what's that?
The Jewish is the original.
There's also Costa Gaidinis recorded it in New York, which he got from Klezmorim.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So this is the interesting thing about this tune is there are a couple of sources from non-Jewish sources like the Gus Gadinis, the great Greek clarinetist, recorded a version of it, but he clearly learned it from Klezmorim. This is a tune, unlike so much of the other repertoire that we know that was shared with either Ukrainian musicians or Polish musicians or especially Romanian musicians, Ottoman Greek musicians.
Sorry, it's not shared, Joe. It's not shared. The Jewish version was.
Just let me finish, okay?
Yeah, okay.
So this melody is endemic. I have not. It's all of the sources that we've come across are identified as Jewish. They all reference the Rebbe in some way or some late night thing. Narazviech is at dawn, so it represents maybe Zont or a Gute Nacht. There's Lekavod, I think even in the Kamen book, it's called Lekavod dem Rebben or something like that. The Naftula, the Abe Schwartz is by Rubin Suda. So it's very, very interesting to see that something like this is so widespread. This variant, and I would play it. I mean, I don't know if we have time to dig into this for a couple of minutes.
Question for Pete.
Go ahead.
All right, can I?
I also wanted to save time to answer the few questions in the chat.
Can we do that? Can we just reference some of the questions in the chat and then come back to Joe?
Okay, but let's not forget, because this is fascinating. I would definitely want to.
Yeah, that would be great. Hankala had some other questions. Did you see those, Zisl?
Yeah, I'm reading those, and because people on YouTube and the recording will not see them, I'll read them. Please clarify if it's possible. What do you mean by saying about Magid's approach? I guess that's from my introductory speech. Is anything known about how Magid chose the places and how people to go to and who to record? Is anything known about her research goals for these records? Are there any diary notations of hers? So I partially answered that we do not have notations outside of the ballad notations used for a dissertation, not that I know of. By Magid's approach, I meant primarily the scope of her interest, and I cannot speak to exactly to what her approach was because most of her works remain unpublished and some unpublished. So I would want to look at those, like those about Kazakh urban song or epic song which she did in Kazakhstan, or Karelian songs. It's not available. So I'm hoping that the day will come, and also the better day in history, also when things will clear up, and we can go maybe hopefully one day, say to Russia and work with those archives and etc. etc. One would hope. Is there anything so how Magid chose? It's a great question. I don't know. It's a great question. How you get the original lead? How do you get an original lead? Once you arrive at a certain place, you ask around, who's the best violinist here? Who's the best singer? People will show you. But how you choose the place where to go, that's a great question. I do not know the answer. So
I think I may just add something quick and short.
Yes, Michael.
She participated in the general program of this research institute, and there was an article by a Russian scholar, Petrova, who describes the planning of these expeditions. So partially when Magid wanted to record the Yiddish ballads, she did it herself without the institutional support. But when she went to make the recordings of Jews, this was part of the whole program. So
definitely, it was officially officially sanctioned. I just dropped the link. If you you can't click through. You have to select the text in the link because it has Cyrillics in the link. But it's an article in Russia. If you have to select the entire text and then paste it into a browser. So don't click on it as is. It will not lead you anywhere. That's the article that Mikhail just mentioned. Yes, definitely Petrova writes about that. And by extension, by the way, it was a whole like anniversary book of articles published by the Pushkinsky Dom, Pushkin House. Really resourceful book, important source. Around 2013, I believe, or so, or maybe later, 2018, around that time. Yes.
Is there a sense how Magid's research was reflective of the political environment?
Well, she was reflective of political environment.
Yeah, what sort of pressures? I mean, we talked.
He recorded, as she said, survivors from the revolution, survivors from something like refugees from the revolution. Some people who ran away from Warsaw, from Białystok, somewhere in Poland. So there were clearly some politically charged songs, revolutionary songs that she recorded from Jewish sources in Moscow and Leningrad, and those are standalone recording sessions, stationary sessions that she did, and they are part of that digitized collection of hers. Again, some of them are better legible, better heard. Lyrics, sometimes it's really impossible to identify the lyrics there. So some of it is like semi-lost. They're there, but they are lost because unless you know the songs, you cannot really decipher what it is. Yeah. But yes, there was clearly politically charged repertoire, ideologically charged repertoire that she recorded. Jewish and Russian as well.
Real quick question, Zisl, did you read anything about, was her expedition and like the other ones, were they ever attacked by bandits or robbers that messed up some of their collection materials?
No, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. No reports about that, so allegedly no. Mm-hmm. Oh, so there's another question in the chat from Daniel Kartner. repeating my question from the other question panel, Pete's request. Can you clarify again Magid's research on ballads? This writing was done in the late 19th, yes. So that was the topic of her PhD dissertation, Ballada в еврейском фольклоре, the ballad in Jewish folklore, defended in 1939, never published, exists as a manuscript, like typewritten manuscript. Or in another phase of her work. I'm not aware of another phase of her work where she specifically focused on the ballad outside or after 1938-39. Probably not. She had access to English or other such ballads. She was clearly aware of some research. She quotes sources in English, in Dutch, in German, in Polish in her dissertation. I saw that with my own eyes. Unfortunately, I don't have the copy of the dissertation at home. Foolishly enough, I did not make a copy. I could have done in 2002. 2004. There's a copy at Hebrew University, so Michael clearly has access. Anybody? No, it's not true. I think you mentioned that, or maybe somewhere there was a copy made in the from the Russian Public Library's copy that has a copy there. So that would be.
There are two copies, one at the Russian National Library and the other one at the Pushkin Dome.
So you're saying there's not a copy in Israel?
In Israel, no, we don't possess any.
In defending her dissertation, she was rejected by a woman named Mara, or she was defending that of the Jewish ballads at the Institute of Language and Philology or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was. I don't know. Was she given a PhD?
She was. Ultimately, okay. She was. Yes.
But that work was rejected.
Maybe that's why the date on the dissertation says 1938.
39. But her.
No,
but the.
No. On the title page, it says 38, but the defense date was 39. So maybe the two dates. Maybe she was sent to, Darabotka, maybe so to complete, to work the homework, whatever that was called, it to come back and for another defense date. Maybe that I did not find any mention of that, but she ultimately got her degree in 1939.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if
Joel, you still have your hand up, Joel.
Oh,
well, yeah. So Joel, let's go back maybe to Joel's.
Okay. I will lower my hand.
Joel, Joel, can you restate the subject of this discussion?
Oh, well, this was just, I don't have a digitized version of Zisl's book, but this is the object in question is, for anybody who's got the book, is number 23, Chasanim Gadya.
Yeah, let me try and find the I'll share, but please keep going. I'll share the book.
Okay. And it was collected from a blind fiddler. I don't know whether we even know whether he was a professional or not.
We don't.
This is one of the interesting things, is even the fiddlers that she collected from that are identified as professional klezmorim, it's not very virtuosic playing. So this kind of raises all kinds of questions, whether there was an earlier tradition. I mean, right, this is at the time that she and also Beregovsky were collecting, this tradition had gone, what was left of it had gone underground. So the older musicians were perhaps not playing anymore. The younger musicians, maybe they hadn't played in a couple of decades at the time they were documented. But when we look at some of the fiddle recordings that were collected by Kisselgoff, and also, of course, the early commercial 78 recordings of like Leon Ahl and Oscar Zaingut and these fiddlers, it's much, much more polished, professional kind of playing, whether or not they had conservatory training. So that raises all kinds of questions, whether this was a local issue that for whatever reason, that in the Belarusian context, this kind of virtuosity didn't develop. But I think that a couple of the fiddle players from that region that Kisselhoff collected were more heading in the direction of virtuosity. So maybe this is just a chronological.
Joel, I have something to say to that. There was a whole caste of blind players, courtyard players basically talking about the Gassensingers,
Right.
Häufsingers, which we know of from Poland, from elsewhere, and there are songs about them. So people who only found playing in the courtyards and in the streets as a source of their income, basically playing for handout, for nedove. And I heard many such accounts from the people whom Nina Stepanska and I interviewed in the early 2000s, who would remember some such people, especially after World War II, when people were maimed, got blind, losing their limbs, and strolling around courtyards and playing for handout. So that was a fact of life. Maybe well into the 50s or even early 60s, people remember such players. So I would not. It's impossible to say whether or not those players used to be professional. Likely not. A majority of them probably not. They would learn some fiddling from whoever, their parents or some fiddler in the town, and then would just use that skill to make their living.
Well, the history of blind musicians, like the Kobzari, go back, centuries back of
Yeah, but Kobzari were professionalized. There was a whole kind
no,
of
you're right. But many of them were blind.
right. But that's where the commonalities end, I guess. So
Right.
we're like
Well,
the
I think my point was that even like the musicians like Chaim Cheretenko, and I can't remember the names, there were like 3 or 4 of the informants who were identified as professional klezmers, but their playing is not what I would call frilly in the same way that we're used to from the sort of fancy pants violinists that we've heard on that we all have heard and loved from the other recordings. So
Right.
that's very, and including some of the field recordings that Baragovsky made, like of this guy named Behrman, who's
right.
chart really super virtuosic. So,
Right.
but okay, so, do you have a way to play this, or should I share my screen and then and play this tune? And I think I don't.
Please go ahead. I think you should be able to.
Let's see. I need to share. How do I go to share my sound? I got to go to advanced. Share sound. It's already set. Okay, video file and then share. Okay, this should work. Okay, you don't need to see my desktop, but let's see if I can get to my sound file here. This should be it. Here, if I can find the.
And meanwhile, I'll drop the address.
I'll just throw out my transcription, which is just by pen that I penciled in.
Mhm.
Oh, maybe it doesn't work. Hold on. Here we go. This is beginning of the second line.
Joel, you can put the transcription as a PDF in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
But you can see it?
No, we can't see anything.
Oh, okay. I think I'll have to figure
We'll
out.
just hear the source recording.
Yeah. Once upon a time, a few weeks ago, I knew how to do this.
Email it to me and I'll throw it up there.
Okay. But you can see it's very slow. 2, 3, 4.
I love the skips.
So you can
Yeah, I know. I've got a lot of them. But we still cannot see your transcription, Joe.
No, I shared it with Cookie. She's gonna
Did
put it in
you
the.
Oh,
did you send it to me? I don't see it. I don't have it.
It.
Probably, Joel, you'd have to like unshare and then reshare again.
Yeah, maybe
And
just
share
share
the
the
video.
screen.
Well, I'm sorry, I had a way to do this, and Bob Blacksburg showed me how to toggle between all this stuff a couple weeks ago, but I've already, because I'm such a Luddite, I've already forgotten how to do it. But I sent it to Cookie, so she
Okay,
should
I
be-
just got it.
Uh-huh.
All right, I'll get it up there.
Okay, anyway, so there's another challenge, right? So this is the exciting thing about this material is we have recordings without transcriptions. It's the complete opposite of what we have, like say with the Kisselhoff material, where we have these manuscripts and no recordings. Here, it's like a lot of it is, and I have to say, Zisl, you must have spent a lot of time on this because a lot of it is fantasy land, right? You get to these places where they skip or where there's bars missing and stuff. You have to figure out something that makes musical sense to fit in. And this is what was the essence of our Voretsky Pass Magid project as well, to fit something in that fits the aesthetic of the tune that makes it sound like that's how it was supposed to go. So, and in the transcription I did, I completed the last 8 or the last 10 bars or so differently than Zisl did. So it's interesting to see, because that was the part we just got to with the skips. So anyway, that's the short version.
You use the quarter notes there.
Yeah.
You know, it's
I
interesting.
wrote it out in 4/4. I think it makes sense to write.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's up.
makes
I
sense.
got it. It's up there. But one interesting thing is we had a tune in 3 that had a space missing, so we just filled it in our own way. And then after we did the recording, we found the missing piece.
On a completely different catalog number.
Yeah.
They had miscatalogued it.
Yeah, it was so interesting. The record was out, and then we went, oh, here's the missing piece. Then we kind of thought, well, we like ours a little better.
I was going to say, which version is better?
Right. Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, that happened to me as well with also with the Fortunoff archive thing, when you just find out some details, information later, because it's investigative work that you
Correct.
keep doing, and so little, so scarce information when you're restoring something from a few lines from, say, a Holocaust survivor who's not a great folk singer, and then it's nevertheless a valuable source. And you do your best, and then there's time is ticking. You have to release the album, and after the fact, somebody actually indicates, oh, oops. So in the next printing, you can correct that or make a errata list.
Well, and we also we use sometimes the Grotzinger transcriptions as first to look at them, and sometimes they notated the transcription as a modulation when you could clearly see that it was a difference in the speed because D Fragish doesn't modulate down a half step.
It doesn't, no.
Unless you're doing hip hop, but you know.
Now, I just want to go back. Joel, did you want to make, thanks for presenting that, but did you want to make, was there a wider point that you were trying to make by presenting recording?
Well, I think it's just provides us with another context for a well-known melody that shows how incredibly flexible these tunes were, and how distantly a variant can be from the sort of the version that we're more familiar with, and still yet be identifiable as the tune. So in this one, for example, not only are some of the actual shapes of the melody are different, but the fiddle player switched the C and the B section. So instead of going A A B B C C, it goes A A C C B B, and yet it's still very clearly the tune, and it shows how incredibly flexible, because this tune was either recorded or notated as a Bulgar, as a Freilachs, as a Chussedl, now as a Dobreden, and probably a couple of other contexts as well.
Okay, Christina?
Maybe I'm gonna pick a fight here, but like that's what we're here for. But I
good.
Up
Yeah, absolutely.
first on what Cookie started mentioning something about the sort of pop lore sort of concept that local fiddle players do have like rather a profound influence within their sort of within a regional concept of a style. I mean, if we're talking about Appalachian music, we can talk about, there's a North Carolina style, there's the Piedmont, Virginia, there's West Virginia, so like this. And Zev raised his hand up to say, no, 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 no. And I'm not sure, I'm not going to speak for you. I want to hear what you have to say about this. But I do want to second this concept that Cookie brought up, that we shouldn't discount the influence of local, particularly either good or popular or sort of well-versed musicians to have kind of an influence locally in their sort of in a regional sort of stylistic concept. So, and I wanted to first second what Kiki said and then ask Zev to complete his thought.
Because I want to ask Zev something too before
Okay.
Zev gets to talk. Zev and I had this very friendly argument on a bus in Weimar. Same argument. Wasn't an argument. It was just a discussion, but and we hugged at the end, so it was all good. But one thing I'm curious about, and maybe Zisl or Zev or anybody, but Zev first. In interviewing my father from Veretsky, both my parents are Holocaust survivors, so talking about music with them didn't happen until later. They just didn't want to talk about it. And the records we had at home were Paolo Humeniuk and the Berry Sisters. It, wasn't really so, yes, Yiddish, but the instrumental music from back home was not discussed until I really forced my father into letting me interview him. He didn't know the word Bulgar. He knew the word Freilich. Anything fast was a Freilich. And Veretsky was very far west. Wait, west is that way. Yeah, very far west. Kind of right now, I guess that area is central, right? Isn't the Veretsky Pass is now central to Ukraine, central west, like not north-south, but center. So he didn't know, like I said, he knew the word Dobry Den. He knew the word, like I said, Bulgar, Dobry Den. A slow tune would have been a niggin, or I never heard the word chassidl from him, but that doesn't mean anything. He wasn't, he played harmonica and he sang, so he wasn't a professional musician. So my question is, along with, this terminology that we're using, like you said, Zisl, I think you're the one that said you asked somebody who didn't know what you were talking about when you said the word, was it Bulgar? I don't remember, but that kind of struck something in me. And as far as the fiddler influencing, I know the fiddler in Veretsky was Mendel Haskell, and he also traveled to Munkac, which is where my mom is from. So, they did have this region, but everybody talked about the way Mendel played. And so I feel like, okay, here, put it out there. I mean, I feel as a fiddle player and as people whose students, like when I hear klezmer kids playing, kids meaning anyone under the age of 50, I go, that's an Alicia clone, that's a Cookie clone, that's a Steve Greenman clone, that's a Deb clone. So people latch on to their own instrumentalist that they love, and they model after that, and then they take off on their own. They do their own thing. So go for it.
I want to echo that. Oh, sorry, Zev,
I
go
want to
ahead.
hear from Zev, actually.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry, Josh. Look, I just want to repeat that klezmer was a professional, and there's often a lot of loose terminology here. This is not a folk musician. There were amateur musicians.
Zev, like what
fiddlers.
I'm saying, I want to just stop you right there, just in the most loving way possible. I'm not talking about amateur musicians. I'm talking about pro musicians here. The comment that I'm making about regional styles is about professional musicians and how professional musicians influence each other with their styles. It doesn't matter whether it's an amateur musician or professional musician, because Cookie is a pro, as am I. We're all pros here,
that's
and
true,
people
that's
are.
true.
People are picking up on the style of, if you've got in your region this guy or that guy, and you're coming up, you're going to sound like either the band that you apprentice with, or you're going to be like, I don't like that guy. I'm going to want to sound like the other guy. Like,
let me just point out that klezmorim is usually a point, and Dave Taras told this to me very specifically, that you didn't just learn from your father or from your uncle, you were apprenticed to another band to
Right.
get some variety, to get a
Correct.
different style, right? And then you would choose what you wanted to do. Again, what's often there's a methodological problem in using experiences from folk music, from village musics, whether it's in America or whether it's in Scotland or Romania or Hungary or anyplace
I
else.
think we're making a much larger point than that, Zev. I think both
Please,
Cookie and I are
let
making
me
a
let
much
me
larger point.
make my point. You can make yours.
Okay.
But okay. But there were certain norms that were accepted for the profession of the klezmer to play at a chasana, and the klezmer had the monopoly, as we say, right? The chazuka, and nobody else could play it at a wedding, a Jewish wedding. Now, the other points to understand that you have to know where the klezmer profession existed and where it didn't exist. And in places of Austria-Hungary where the Jews were emancipated, in some regions the klezmer persisted as a profession. In other regions, it disappeared very quickly in the 19th century. So, like in much of Transylvania, there were no more klezmorim by the end of the 19th century. So that's a bad thing. Whereas in Galicia, there were still klezmorim in the 20th century. Other point, of course, is the Soviet repression of religious weddings. And I first heard about this from guess who? Izali Zemsovsky, who told me when I met him in Petersburg back in the early 90s, how difficult it was to research any traditional wedding. Because all the traditional weddings, whether they were Christian or Jewish or Muslim, they had a religious component that were discouraged in the Soviet period. And so there was very different things going on in different parts of the Soviet territories in different decades. So in parts of Ukraine, evidently, Beregovsky still had very good opportunity to learn from a musician like Makonowiecki, who really knew, how the traditional wedding was conducted. But Magid may not have always had informants like that where she went. We just don't know. We just don't know. We'd have to really know. It's probably too late even to interview non-musical folks.
I can confirm that in the north, the authorities were much harsher. The crackdown on Jewish traditional life or religious life in general was much harsher than in the south. And Ukraine.
That's very
In
important.
Ukraine, people used to get circumcisions, not in the north, not as much in the north. I mean, Nina and I interviewed people in Vitebsk and other places in in that area where they spoke about underground chuppahs, but always mentioning the word underground, talking immediately after World War II and soon after World War II. So there were bans, there was intention, there was urge to do that, but in that generation, but it was all underground. It was unthinkable, and there were repercussions. People were fired from work for even praying in the minyan.
Yep.
It was a real
I've
thing.
heard such things.
But not so in the south. It was much tolerated in the south of Ukraine, or even not in the south of Ukraine. I mean,
in Ukraine in general.
In general, in Novograd-Volynsk, I don't know, in Bila Tserkev, I know people from there, large communities, including some of my extended family. And yeah, they definitely they led much of a shtetl-like life in this very much in the late Soviet Union.
Yeah.
I'd like to echo one thing. I'd just like to echo one thing that I think is kind of important. Christina, living in Budapest for so long, how important the primashes are in those regions, especially, we have Kalotasheg and Mezersheg, and in Mezersheg it was Adam Istvan Adam, who was the guy. That's the primash, and that determined the style. And we used to think of, musicologists used to kind of make the ideological mistake of calling things regional styles rather than individual styles of the primashes because they didn't know their names necessarily. And so, in Kalotasheg, we have, I know from my guys in Budovitz, because they've learned from several of the primashes in those regions, the guy Varga is the primash that they like to learn from. He ornamented much more heavily than a guy that was 5 kilometers away. I mean, the region, so you would have said then, gee, what's the regional style? Well, the region itself is split up into very small segments, and those are the professional musicians that are they're being influenced by that primash. He determines what's going on, where you come in when you're playing a doina or a slow tune, where the musicians enter, where they exit, what chords they're using. the whole thing. So the idea of the individual musician being the progenitor of the style is something that we have to know. And it's not, they are from a region, and you can call it a regional style, but more importantly, it's from them. And we see that everywhere, even in Kandel versus Schwartz versus Terrace versus Brandwein. We see that everywhere. And the one other thing, Christine, before you jump in, is the idea that, yes, Magid really concentrated a lot on the amateur musicians. And the amateur musicians are the ones that take their cues from the professional musicians. So the determining factor of the styles is generally coming from above and sinking down. Sorry to use the term because the Germans were fixated on the word of versunkene Musik, music that goes from the top down. It really goes in both directions, but the house music that's being made in the homes of the Solodkin family is not being determined by the Solodkin family, probably. It's rather being taken as a dilution almost from the professional cast of musicians that existed. So we have to make the distinction what is regional versus individual, and amateur versus professional, and to know what those categories are and how they interact with each other.
Yeah.
I was just going to say there's a great book called Poplore by a guy named, I think, Richard Blaustein, that kind of goes over this. He kind of proposes this concept from an American perspective, and he kind of goes, it's not a long book, but it's quite good. And I think that concept really applies to exactly what Josh is saying in my experience and others.
I'll make a last point before I drop out, because it's getting later in Budapest.
Yeah.
That I really have a responsibility to publish my interviews with Jeremiah Hescheles, the great poet and fiddler, because we listened to all the available Galizia and klezmer recordings, and he had been a fiddler himself, and he was very explicit about what was the general style of his area of near Lvov, and then when I listen, for example, to Solinsky, he was a southerner. From his Galician perspective, he was doing something more Romanian. It was not what you would do in Lvov. But then he listened to several fiddlers from the Lvov area, and he was very specific about what was what was considered the norm, what was a bit more westernized, for example, more classical trained, but still klezmer, and what he would say would be a poorly digested classical. He would say erod genasht. He learned a bit from the classical violin style, but not sufficiently integrated. I wish I'd asked him more, but I got something from him in that, what was considered a norm and what was very good, what was not so good, what was more classicizing, and what was good but foreign. This Solinsky was probably from Kolomea, he thought, somewhere closer to Bukovina. It was not from his home area. No.
Solinsky was a pseudonym for Oscar Zaingut, as
I
far as
don't believe it.
from Lvov.
And
It's incontrovertibly
well, Hescheles would not
a
have agreed.
group of researchers, including myself, and
I know, but Hescheles did not agree with that. Nope.
Hescheles is using his ears, but he didn't have the documents. So
Well,
anyway, I just want to come back to this point that Christina and Cookie were making, which is, I think it's absolutely true, and this is true for every kind of music, like Josh was just saying. It has nothing to do specifically with klezmer, but to use a klezmer example, there's no better example in the modern era than Dave Terrace. When Dave Terrace came to New York in 1921 or whatever it was, he developed very rapidly a very idiosyncratic style of playing that was so identifiably his, and all of a sudden everybody wanted to sound like that. Before that, you had Brandweins, you had Beckermans, also two very influential families and two very influential clarinetists. As soon as Dave Terrace came, everybody wanted to play his tunes, but not just his tunes, they wanted to sound like him. The whole next generation, the Ray Musicers, the Paul Pinkases, the Sammy Musicers, the Sid Beckerman, et cetera, they all wanted to sound like Dave Terrace. And that's how a single musician can totally transform a tradition.
But we're all living, millions of
one
Jews
question.
living in New York, in one big city.
One question, one thing that we kind of can tell, like when it made me think of it when Joel was playing that very slow recording. And that is one thing we were kind of, when we were listening to all those 96 instrumental tunes, the tempos. Now, of course, it's wax cylinders, so you can't really, if it got a little hot, it got faster, so you can't really kind of make a whole statement about that. But what I've noticed, I cut my teeth with Paul Pincus and Pete Socolow and, the old New York guys. I was lucky enough to be on the bandstand with them for over 20 years. And the one, two words they said to me when I would start something is too fast. Because the older style, at least the older New York style, you're playing for dancing for older folks, and the Chassidl was slower, the Bulgar and Freilich was slower, and even now I find myself when I sit in playing with the youngsters, if I play with Craig or Abigail or Zoe or those guys or Jake, I'm going, whoa, you're playing this so fast. This is like way too fast. Now, with my father, when he taught me the tunes that I was forced to play, which I friggin' hated as a kid, he'd say to me, why you play like a gypsy? I'm playing too fast. And what he told me was that the gypsy parents used to tell their the children when they're playing too slow, why you play like the Jews? Too slow. So it really taught me this kind of feeling of the Jewish sensibility is slower. It's not meant to be virtuosic. Even the musical style is much more internal. And, so it really kind of like, even though I wanted to rebel against my father, it stuck with me that, it's not about how fast can your fingers go. It's, are you facilitating the age of the people on the dance floor? So
it's not just age. You have to understand the basis of Jewish dance.
Correct.
Leon Friedland told me the same thing. Leon Friedland, who was the pioneer in studying Jewish dance.
Right.
And as I've studied gesture in dance, you cannot gesture intelligently. You cannot gesture meaningfully beyond a certain tempo.
Correct.
Absolutely not. And Dave Taras told me exactly the same thing.
Well, that's really
cool. Many times.
When
that's
we recorded, when we recorded Meyer Bogansky for the Bezetzen's whole ceremony that he had sung to us for the Budovitz Wedding Without a Bride record, right. We recorded him 3 different times singing it. He always sang it exactly the same. When we recorded it, the instrumental parts, he said, oh my, it's way too fast. And it was slow. And we didn't play it quite as slow as he sang it, but we thought, oh, he might have meant that it should be a little faster than this. But no, that's really slow tempo, very hard to play that way. But I would also add, Cookie and Zev, that it's not just the speed, it's the heaviness also. Because if you can listen, actually you can find the really fast tempos in the early recordings, but they don't sound as heavy as we may play them today. Of course, if you have a drum kit, that heavies out the whole thing. It'll put so much weight in the whole thing, alone. But beside that, the whole style of playing was, when it's fast, it's lighter. And that's something that we rarely talk about, that it's not just speed.
First of all, I concur that the tempos on that album, the Wedding Without a Bride, are pretty slow to me. Were pretty slow to me when I first heard it, before knowing you and before meeting you in person, Josh.
Not slow enough. Not slow enough.
Not slow enough, right? But the second part, the last part that you mentioned, that when you go faster, go lighter, and that's fair for a lot of those Litvish tunes on the Northern Magid's collection. A lot of them are basically polkas. And the thing is to play them, and Craig Udelman, who was my bandmate with whom we recorded this, the Litvakus album, which includes a lot of the
Focus.
Bring it up slower.
Yeah, slow. So, anyways, the Ryzen. Anyway, so that's what he developed. In his playing, going harder, going heavier on the offbeat. So you bottom 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 bottom, because in this way the offbeat propels you into the next beat easier. So that's just what happens musically. It's easier to maintain the fast tempo, and then you can go infinitely fast to the infinitely fast tempo, whether or not that was the intention of the source player. So, but yeah, but there's between the heaviness and the lightness, and then we can go and talk also about the actual recording situation as opposed to the dancing situation, event situation, wedding situation. That's a whole other thing that, researcher coming into your house with all this equipment, all those questions, it's a whole stress factor, makes you play differently, perform differently, and talk differently about the music. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you said brings the equipment in, quick, tiny story. My dad was apprenticed in Vedetsky as a tailor. And there was a researcher at KU in Lawrence, we grew up in Kansas City, who was doing research on apprenticeships. And his theory was that the apprentices lived with their teachers. So he came to our house. My mother put out a huge Hungarian spread, and he interviewed my father for about an hour and a half. And I'm 10 years old. And he says, Mr. Segelstein, so in my theory, I feel like I'm researching that students lived with the teachers, and he said, yes, of course. I lived with him 5 days a week. I went home for Shabbos. Okay, fine. And then another one comes a year later who is refuting this guy's research, who says, I'm finding, a woman came in and she said, I'm finding that actually not in all cases the students lived with the apprentices. And he said, yeah, I didn't live there. I lived at home, and I went to him after Cheder, and sometimes on a Sunday. And she left, and I said, Dad, I thought we're never supposed to tell a lie. Which one? He goes, how do I know? That was 60 years ago. So what I'm saying is that sometimes the informants, number one, will tell the researcher what they want to hear. I found this with German Goldenstein 100 times with him. And second of all, the stress of the actual interview, like you said, Zisl, can really form what they're telling you. So when we are interviewing folks, we have to take that into account.
you're not just observing, you're intervening into their lifestyle. And
Exactly. And like the work you do with the Yale Archives, I mean, my parents both testified for the Visual History Foundation, the Shoah Foundation at UCLA. And I watched those a few years after my dad died, and I realized that some of the things he told me weren't in there. Or then I learned things that he never told me. So it's really interesting, the relationship between researcher and interviewer. That's all.
I just dropped the link to the project, the Fortune Project's web page on the Yale University Library, so you can go and listen and familiarize yourself. Songsfromtestimonies.org. That's a shortcut to the Yale University Library.
Okay, I'm going to use the host prerogative to jump in and say that we've been talking about Sofia Magid, this incredible publication, thanks to Zisl, and for the last 2 hours and 15 minutes practically. And I think we all should enjoy the rest of our days. Some of them are more fleeting if you're in Jerusalem or Budapest or places like that. But I wanted to thank Zisl so much for this amazing contribution. Well done. Yasher Koach. Thank all our panelists. And of course, thank everybody who has been on the webinar today. It's been great to have you. We're going to post, this webinar has been recorded, so I'm going to post it on the CTMD, Center for Traditional Music and Dance website, hopefully tomorrow or the next day. And so you can relive it there as much as you'd like. And Zisl's got some resources there. Please go buy the book.
And also there's a website for the Magid Chronicles by Veretsky Pass, where you can listen to this other project. And this is my website, Slepovitch.com, and ctmd.org, and the Center for Traditional Music and Dance website, where you can find the recording and many other wonderful resources for traditional music and dance.
Yeah, and with the webinar, I'll put all the relevant links and all that.
Great work, Zisl. Awesome.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Let's
you.
give a big hand.
Thank
Good
you.
to see everyone.
Such an honor and pleasure. I'm Mechaya. I'll see you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for doing this, Pete.
All right, thank you. All right.